The note arrived the morning after, slipped under his door before the 6th bell. Her hand, compact and exact, a half hour of your time, if you have it. My study. And below that, one line he had not received in any prior communication from her. You don't have to. He noted the clause. It was the first thing she had written to him that offered rather than required. He went. Winter recess had officially begun at the night's end, and most of the academy had taken this literally. The residential tower corridors had the specific acoustic quality of spaces returned to themselves after months of continuous occupation, a particular silence that was not empty, but that carried the shape of absence, the way a room still smells of wood smoke after the fire has gone out. He passed 3 students with travel bags in the stairwell, both of them the commuter variety, who had to reach coaches before morning departed. He passed no one he needed to manage. The courtyard was damp and deserted. The December light was low and colorless, the kind that arrived in the east as gray and stayed gray all day. She answered the door herself. The anteroom was empty. The small study was the same as the night before, a lamp, the window gray with morning, her shelves in their exact order, except the lamp had been trimmed recently and the chair across from hers had been moved 2 inches toward the center of the table. He placed this at the corner of his attention and sat. No tea. This was not the pointed absence of tea that last night had been. Last night's missing tea was a statement. This morning's absence was simply the absence of something neither of them required. She looked at him with the expression he had come to identify as her genuine mode. The managed version was neutral attention that revealed nothing. The genuine version was the same surface carrying something underneath it that was doing real work. I've been thinking, she said. He waited. About the part you didn't say. She looked at the table, briefly, in the way of someone reviewing a notation rather than performing consideration. You told me what you are, what the structure is, and why it exists. You didn't tell me what it's for. He considered this. The structure is for surviving long enough to be useful. At what? At what comes next, he said. I cannot afford to stand out here in the ways that would actually matter. Not yet. I am not ready. When you are ready, she said, and there was something specific in her phrasing, a directness that the rest of her sentences this morning had not carried. What will you do? I'll stand out, he said, in the ways that matter. And whose side will you be on? He looked at her. She had asked it with the register of someone who had been receiving this question's answer her entire life. He knew the answers the question usually produced, the faction name, the house name, the ideological architecture stated as certainty, the performance of a fixed future self. Every student from a major noble house answered with their house's patron faction. Every scholarship student answered with the house that held their interest or the principle they had decided to perform. All of them answered. He said, whatever side makes sense. She was still. He watched her receive it, not its content, but its form. The form was an honest answer that contained no allegiance, no performance, no attempt to give her what she might have wanted to hear. The form was also a strategic answer that happened to be true, which was harder than either of those things separately. That, she said after a moment, is the most honest answer I have heard in 3 years at this academy. You should hear it more often. The expression that was not the almost smile arrived in her face. This was the version adjacent to acknowledgement rather than warmth, the face of someone receiving a statement accurately. 3 years, he said. You've been hearing allegiance declared in advance. I've been hearing the person people intend to be, she said. Before the situation that would test the intention exists. She paused. That's not dishonesty. That's optimism. About the future self who will carry the allegiance through whatever comes. You don't find it useful. I find it informative about the present moment, she said. It tells me who the person is when they believe their alignments are fixed. It tells me almost nothing about who they'll be when the ground moves. He said, whatever side makes sense is also only accurate about the present moment. Yes, she said, but the person who says it knows that. That's the difference. He filed this. It was a specific distinction between the person who believed their allegiance permanent and the person who acknowledged it contingent. Both might behave identically in most circumstances. In the specific circumstances where it mattered, they would not. She looked at him. The December gray in the window was beginning to take on the first quality of actual light, still colorless, but present, defining the line of the wall and the edge of the shelf. "I'm going to ask you something," she said. "All right. Your read of this academy's political structure," she said. "The faction mapping. The adjacency networks. The administrative cross-references." She was precise about it, not accusing, simply naming. "In 3 months, you produced an analysis more complete than anything I assembled in 2.5 years. He waited. How? It was a question about method. She already knew the answer about capability. The method was the thing that told her more. "Systematic observation," he said. "And 2 approaches most students don't use. The general track perspective," she said. "You're invisible to the people who don't think to watch the background." "That's 1, he said. She considered. "The administrative record." "The administrative record," he said, "against behavioral pattern. What the record says a person does versus what they actually do. The gap between those 2 is where almost everything useful is." She absorbed this in the way she absorbed everything, not quickly, not visibly, but without waste. He could see, from the shift in the quality of her stillness, that she was already running the implications, which of her own patterns would appear in administrative records she hadn't monitored. What the gap between her recorded behavior and her actual behavior would show to someone reading it carefully. "That's a cold way to understand a place," she said. "It's accurate," he said. "Yes," she said. "That's what I meant." He looked at her. She looked at him. The lamp made its small sound in the quiet of the nearly empty academy, and the December morning continued its gray arrival outside the window. She said, "Thank you for coming." He stood and placed the chair precisely as he had found it, not the 2 inches toward center that it had been when he arrived, but the position it had been at on the evening of the tea in November, which was also the position of its permanent home based on the marks in the rug. He noticed that she noticed him put it back in its actual place. She didn't say anything about this. "Thank you for the note," he said. Particularly the last line. She didn't respond to this. He went to the door. In the corridor, which was cold with the specific cold of a space that had shed its human heat overnight and not yet recovered it, he walked back toward the north residential tower with the particular attention of someone cataloging what had just happened before it settled into retrospect. She had asked whose side he would be on. He had told her the truth. The truth was accurate, and it was also incomplete, in the way that all truths about future states were incomplete when the state had not yet arrived. He had said whatever side makes sense. He had not said that his current analysis of what would make sense, an analysis that had been running since September and that had incorporated a significant revision to its starting premises approximately 14 hours ago, was producing a result that he was not yet ready to name. He walked through the damp courtyard and back into the tower, and he did not examine the result further. It was contingent. It would confirm itself or revise itself over the next 18 months. Until then, the truth he had told her was accurate. He went upstairs. The morning was very quiet, and the academy, stripped of most of its students, sounded like something enormous resting. He was at the door when she spoke. "There's one more thing." He turned back. She was still seated, both hands on the table in front of her, in the posture of someone who had decided to say a thing and was saying it without performance. "The situation we're both now in," she said. He returned to the table. He did not sit. Neither did she signal that he should. "You have information about my capabilities," she said. "I have information about yours. We're at the same academy. We have overlapping research interests, which I will not enumerate and which you will not confirm or deny. We are not allies." She said this last part precisely, without weight, as a statement of accurate fact. "We are also not in opposition." He considered. "No. The default," she said, "when 2 people are not allies and not in opposition, is that they manage each other the same way they manage everything else. Strategically. Without disclosure." "Yes. I want to propose something different," she said. "Not an alliance. Something smaller than that and more durable." He was listening. She said, "I will not expose your capabilities or your cover to anyone, not to the faculty, not to any faction, not through any channel, unless you use your capabilities against me directly. You will not interfere with my work unless it comes into direct conflict with yours. If conflict becomes likely, we negotiate before either of us acts." He looked at her. It was a non-aggression agreement. Spoken aloud, in a room with no witnesses, on a morning when most of the academy had left for winter recess. Not sealed, not signed, not documented in any administrative record or personal cipher. A thing that existed entirely in the memory of two people who were both reliable for memory. And the threshold for direct conflict, he said. If your actions would cause concrete damage to my family's position or my work, she said. If my actions would compromise your cover or your network. Defined by the person whose interests are being damaged, he said. Which is always the aggrieved party, which means the definition is never neutral. She looked at him steadily. Which is why we negotiate before acting. He thought about this. The agreement was not symmetrical in its current state. She had more information about him than he had about her. She knew about the space affinity, the political architecture of the cover, the fact that he was operating a network, the fact that he had been building since age 10. He knew about her investigative work in the restricted section and her capabilities in the advanced track. The asymmetry was significant. She was proposing a pact from a position of greater information. You're offering more than you're receiving, he said. I'm aware. Why? She was quiet for a moment, not the managed quiet that preceded a decision, but a different quality, the quiet of someone who is choosing how much of a true answer to give. Because, she said, the alternative is managing you strategically, and I've been doing that since September, and it's produced inaccurate models every time. A pause. You're not predictable by the methods I use on everyone else. Which means managing you without an agreement costs me more than the agreement does. He absorbed this. It was a tactical assessment stated as clearly as she was capable of stating things. It was also, underneath the tactical framing, an acknowledgement. She had tried to predict him and failed, and the failure itself was informative about what he was. All right, he said. She looked at him. We're agreed. We're agreed, he said. She stood. He stood. Neither of them extended a hand. The agreement was verbal and required no gesture to seal it. The lamp had burned low enough that the morning light from the window was now the primary illumination, and the room looked different in it, smaller, more precise, the objects on her shelves casting short, definite shadows. There's a material in the restricted section, she said. Pre-fragmentation administrative correspondence. Third shelf from the floor in the civil governance section. Not the Thorn Hall materials, the adjacent stack. You haven't seen it yet. He looked at her. It's relevant to the regional taxation question we discussed at the tea, she said. You mentioned the autumn revisions methodology gap. That stack has 3 documents that address the original commission design. She paused. I read them last year. They're not cataloged in the public index. He said, you're telling me this because, she said, I told you I had materials you hadn't seen. And I said you were going to find them. She moved toward the door, which he registered as the signal that the conversation was over. You'll find them faster with a location. He stood for a moment in the small study, with the low lamp and the December morning, and looked at the door she had just opened. Thank you, he said. Second shelf from the left, she said. The documents are in a gray binding with a commission watermark. They don't look significant. He left. He walked back through the empty academy in the gray December light and thought, this was the first real conversation I have had in 3 years. He considered whether this was accurate. It was accurate. Since he was 11, since the plan became fully coherent and his relationship with every person in it became a function of how they fit within the plan, he had not had a conversation in which he told actual truths in real time to someone who was also telling actual truths in real time. He had told Aldrich things. He had told Gareth things. But those truths were selected and shaped by what he could afford to share with people who loved him and who would be harmed or worried by the full version. With Seraphine, in these 2 hours across 2 mornings, he had told things that were accurate about the actual situation. Partial things. Shaped things. But real. The experience of this was different from what he had modeled it would be. He had always assumed that the first real conversation would be either a catastrophe or a negotiation, and the preparation he'd built for it was structured around both those possibilities. What he had not modeled was the specific quality of a real conversation that was neither. The quality of 2 people who were equally competent at concealment, recognizing each other's concealment and choosing, for specific tactical reasons, to lower the minimum layer required. It felt, he noticed, like a particular kind of relief. He noticed that he was noticing this, and he set it aside. The courtyard was empty. The fountain at the center had been drained for winter. Its basin held a thin skin of ice, and the specific melancholy of things that have been put away until they are needed again. He crossed it and went inside and climbed the 3 flights to his room and sat down at his desk and opened his cipher notebook. He wrote, "Non-aggression agreement established. Terms, mutual non-exposure, mutual non-interference, negotiation before conflict. No witnesses. No documentation. Reviewed, asymmetrical in her favor at current information parity. Accepted, correct outcome." He held his pen over the notation for a moment. Then he wrote, in the margin, without cipher, "First real conversation. 3 years." He closed the notebook, placed his pen in its case, and went to find the documents on the 3rd shelf in the civil governance section. In the study behind the closed door he had left through, Seraphine sat for a long time in the silence of the emptied academy. She sat with her hands on the table in front of her, and she looked at the place across from her where he had been seated, and she thought something that she did not, even to herself, put into words. After a while she stood, moved to her shelf, took down the pre-fragmentation administrative correspondence she had been working through for 6 months, and opened it to the place she had marked. She read, "Outside, the December morning had resolved from gray to the specific pale gold of a winter day that had decided to be clear. The light came through the window and fell across her desk and the open book and her hands holding it, and she read until the words made the sense they always made, which was the sense of something enormous and patient arranged carefully against something enormous and patient, and the question of what was holding what was not yet answerable from here." She kept reading. Theological history and ethics met on Tuesdays and Thursdays at the 2nd hour, in a narrow seminar room on the 3rd floor of the central building with 3 windows facing east and a long table that held 12 students at its maximum comfortable capacity. In the 2nd term, Kael was one of 7 students enrolled. He had waited for this class the way you wait for a thing you cannot rush. Master Vellin was 53 years old and had the specific quality of a person who had found his subject genuinely interesting over a very long time and had never stopped finding it genuinely interesting. This was rarer than it sounded. Most faculty who had taught the same material for a decade had developed the protective layer of someone managing a known quantity. Vellin had not. He taught from primary sources, he pulled documents most students had never seen, and he asked questions that were not rhetorical. When a student gave an unexpected answer, he received it with the particular attention of someone for whom unexpected answers were the point. Kael sat at the far end of the table on the window side, took careful notes in the register of a student encountering most of this for the first time, and watched. In the first week, he mapped the class. Vellin's method, 2 sessions covering historical source, 1 session open analysis, 1 session written synthesis. Reading load above Academy standard for seminars, underannounced by Vellin, which meant the prepared students were apparent by session 2. Of the 7 enrolled, 4 were genuinely engaging with the material and 3 were auditing for the administrative portfolio credit. Vellin knew which were which by session 3. He directed his harder questions at the 4 and left the 3 their notes without comment. Kael was in the 4, which was unavoidable. He noted Vellin's behavioral patterns in the classroom the same way he had noted the church representatives in the practice arena, the specific frequency of attention shifts, the distribution of eye contact, the moments when teaching focus narrowed from the room to a particular student or particular question. Vellin distributed attention fairly and with the particular fairness of someone who did it by habit rather than principle. He did not single students out in ways that created social hierarchy. He was, in every observable dimension, an excellent professor. This was the fact that Kael had anticipated and still found, in the experiencing of it, uncomfortable in a specific way. Not morally complicated, he had moved past that register before he arrived. Uncomfortable in the way that understanding something and experiencing it were different processes, and the difference, on contact, was information. The information trap required 3 channels, 3 false pieces, and a monitoring period of sufficient duration to observe the response without contamination. He had planned it during winter recess. The first channel, student gossip, in a context where Vellin's attention was present. Kael had identified during the first 2 weeks of second term that Vellin ate lunch in the faculty common room and arrived at the seminar room 7 minutes early to review his notes. During those 7 minutes, the door was open and the corridor outside was a light traffic zone from the library wing. A carefully calibrated comment about a third-year student's secondary affinity development, specifically that Kaven Aldris, third-year advanced track, had been running light affinity calibration work that suggested a possible tertiary elemental compatibility, made to Renner in the corridor near the seminar door on a Thursday morning, audible at 6 feet, in the register of a student passing on something he'd heard in the dining hall. The information was false. Kaven Aldris had no such development. Kael had checked his observable aura signature in the tournament. The information was calibrated to sound like the kind of thing that would travel in student gossip networks and to be specific enough to be verifiable through the church's tracking system if Vellin chose to report it. The second channel, the church representative. Neve had been replaced during the scandal with a younger representative, early 20s, different notebook, different monitoring pause frequency, who Kael spent the first week of term profiling. His replacement name Kael had not yet established. His behavioral pattern was close enough to Neve's to suggest identical training. At the library session on Tuesday of the second week, Kael positioned himself at a reading table 2 rows behind Damien's usual spot, within casual earshot of the representative, and spent the session taking notes on a general aura theory text. He said nothing for 90 minutes. At the 90-minute mark, while gathering his materials, he said to himself, in the voice of someone reading a notation aloud by accident, dual spatial affinity in a first-year track student. Secondary at a level that would need documentation. Then he appeared to catch himself, looked at nothing in particular, and left. The information was false. There was no dual spatial affinity first year. The description was specific enough to be interesting and vague enough to require further inquiry. The third channel, the restricted section administrative log. Professor Varen's sponsorship still covered Kael's restricted section access. The log required signature on entry and on departure. Under the departure signature field there was a line for nature of research inquiry, which was filled in by most students with a phrase or two of general description. Kael had been filling it in accurately since September. On the second Thursday of second term, he filled it in with primary sources, pre-fragmentation civil administration. Incidental observation, aura structure documentation, unusual core notation in archived assessment file, general stacks reference ATC 117. ATC 117 was a real file. It contained standard assessment records from approximately 40 years ago. The phrase unusual core notation would require review to determine whether it was a reference to anything significant. The review would take time, and the review process itself would be the observable signal. He placed all 3 and began watching. The monitoring period ran 18 days. The first channel produced no response. He watched Vellin for 3 weeks after the corridor comment. Vellin's Tuesday pattern did not change. No new note-taking frequency. No inquiry to the administrative office about Kaven Aldris. No change in how he addressed Kaven Aldris in the one shared lecture they attended. The gossip channel did not move. The second channel produced a response on day 5. The new church representative's monitoring pause duration increased from 9 seconds to 14 seconds on the Tuesday following the library comment. On the following Thursday, Neve, or his replacement's equivalent superior, sent something via the small sealed note that arrived for the representative at the faculty correspondence desk. Kael had been watching the desk from the reading area and tracked the timing. The representative's subsequent session note-taking volume increased. He was reporting something up. The dual spatial affinity false intelligence had traveled. The third channel produced a response on day 12. Vellin arrived at the restricted section on a Wednesday afternoon, not his usual time, not a seminar day, and spent 45 minutes in the administrative log section. Kael, who was at a reading table in the main restricted area, watched him from the angle of the shelf system without appearing to watch him. Vellin found the ATC 117 reference and spent 11 minutes reviewing it. He wrote something in his own notebook, smaller and faster than his seminar writing. He left without checking anything else. The log entry unusual core notation had reached Vellin in 12 days through the administrative record channel. Conclusions, written in cipher that evening. Channel 1, gossip, corridor, not used by Vellin, filtered as unverifiable. Channel 2, Neve adjacent, library, used. Information travels within 5 days via church representatives' regular reporting cycle. Channel 3, administrative log, used. Vellin reviews restricted section administrative records personally. 12-day travel time from log entry to his direct review. Vellin's intelligence preference, documented sources only. He does not report unverified student commentary. He accesses administrative records directly and reports through Neve's chain. 3 things confirmed. The exact channels, the exact speeds, the exact filtering criteria. He closed the cipher and put it away. In the seminar 2 days later, Vellin introduced a primary source account of the church's administrative expansion in the decade following the fragmentation, a document Kael had read in a different version in his own research, but whose institutional significance Vellin's analysis made materially clearer. The seminar ran 20 minutes long because the questions were good. Kael asked 2 of them. He noted that they were good questions, and that asking them was unavoidable, and that asking them in a room with Vellin was not without a specific quality that he did not have a clean name for. He walked to the dining hall for the evening meal and ate with Renner and Sova and Lorne, who were arguing about whether the Academy's tournament bracket seeding formula had been intentionally designed to keep first-year students out of the advanced bracket, or whether this was a structural accident of the weighting method. He ate his dinner and listened and said occasionally useful things. The dining hall was warm and loud and smelled of the winter vegetables and the bread that the kitchen produced every Thursday with specific reliability. He filed. The trap had confirmed everything. He knew how Vellin communicated, and he knew what he communicated. What remained was what to do with the knowing. He spent the second week of February assembling the documentation. Not researching, he had finished the research. What remained was the specific work of taking everything he knew across 5 months of observation and 2 months of targeted intelligence and rendering it into a form that could be understood and used by someone who had not been present for the original work. This was harder than the research itself, in the way that translation is harder than the thing being translated, not because the information was difficult, but because the frame required to convey it accurately had to be built from the recipient's perspective, not the author's. He knew who the recipient was. He was building the frame accordingly. What he had. The communication chain, documented with sufficient specificity that a person with institutional knowledge could verify every link independently. Elder Neve's role as the first link above the academy level, the attunement receiver still maintained by Neve's replacement, the new representative whose name Kael had established through a routine administrative inquiry as Deacon Terrace Fold. Authorized church observer, academic outreach division, credentials in order. Fold to Neve to whatever Neve reported to, that portion of the chain Kael had not followed further, because following it required resources he did not have. The chain existed upward. He could document 2 links with evidence and imply the rest with institutional logic. The student reports, documented by inference and timing. Vellin had been on faculty for 12 years. Kael's evidence covered the last 5, which was the window of the administrative records he could access under Vellin's sponsorship without triggering a review of his access scope. In the last 5 years, 9 students whose academic records showed administrative flag events, scholarship reviews, track placement delays, academic misconduct notations. Within 4 to 8 weeks of periods when Vellin's restricted section access log showed unusual cross-references to their academic files. 4 of those 9 had family members who experienced specific disadvantages in the same window. 2 scholarship families had their church-administered supplemental grants reviewed and reduced. 1 family's administrative petition for land reclassification in the Kingdom Lands Registry was delayed by a church administrative committee decision. 1 family's grain contract with a church institution had not been renewed after a 20-year relationship. He could not prove these outcomes were caused by Vellin's reports. He could prove the timing was consistent with causation, and he could demonstrate the mechanism by which the information could have traveled from Vellin's observation to the administrative decisions. The mechanism was the chain. The chain was documented. One specific report was documentable beyond inference. A record in Vellin's own hand in an annotated text Kael had found on the open shelf of the theology section, not a restricted document, which was itself notable. Contained a marginal notation referencing a student's unusual application pattern next to a specific administrative outcome date. The student was the daughter of Lord Avon Voss, House Voss, documented 2 years before Kael's arrival at the academy. The outcome: a House Voss petition before the Church Administrative Council had been delayed 6 months, costing the House a specific commercial advantage in the Northern Territories licensing arrangement. The petition dealt with ecclesiastical land use, which placed it within the Church Council's jurisdiction. The delay was procedurally justified by a notation about incomplete documentation, which could be verified as a church internal decision made 3 weeks after Vellin's marginal notation. He noted this specific record separately. It was the connection to Seraphine's own investigation. She had been in the restricted section in November reading noble council records from the period of her father's death. The church administrative delay was a different matter, smaller, commercially damaging rather than fatal, but it was Vellin's documented interference with House Voss's interests. She would already have this. His documentation would tell her something she had known for 2 years in better detail than she'd had it. His documentation would also tell her something she did not know, that the church council delay was one of 9 documented instances, that the pattern extended to other families, that the mechanism was not personal animosity, but systematic institutional practice. The Voss incident was a data point in a longer operation. What he could not include. He had no mechanism to include the charter analysis without revealing that he had found the charter, read it, and understood its implications at a level that would immediately distinguish him from anyone conducting a normal restricted section research inquiry. The charter was the explanatory framework for everything else. It explained why Vellin operated the way he did, what the operation was in service of, what organization stood behind it. Without the charter, the documentation showed a professor in an inappropriate relationship with a church administrator who was using student information to benefit an unspecified church interest. With the charter, it showed something categorically larger and more precisely organized. He left the charter out. He also had no mechanism to include the full nature of the attunement receiver in the secondary structure of Damien Cross's core without revealing that he had read Damien's core at handshake range and understood what was there. The secondary structure was relevant background. It demonstrated the operational depth of the embedded presence, but it required an explanation of how he knew it that he was not prepared to give. He left Damien out. What remained was sufficient. It was more than sufficient. It was enough to remove Vellin from the academy, permanently, in a way that would be publicly defensible and that would not require any additional source material to verify. The Dean Hestia, whose 12-year history with the church's influence on academy governance Kael had mapped as part of his initial institutional survey, would not need more than this to act. She would have her own reasons to want it. The proxy problem had resolved itself before he had finished assembling the documentation. He was 14 years old and a first-year general track student with a declared defective core and no institutional standing. Even with everything he had assembled, presenting it himself was not possible. The documentation's completeness would immediately raise questions about how he had produced it, and those questions were exactly the ones he could not answer without cost. He needed the documentation to be presented by someone with institutional weight, personal motive, and independent credibility. Someone who was already investigating Vellin. Someone who had the standing to walk into the dean's office and require attention. Someone who would, on receiving this documentation, verify it through her own channels before acting, which would add an additional layer of independent verification that made the whole thing substantially more defensible. He was not going to ask her directly. Asking directly created a conversation about how he had produced the documentation, which was the same problem as presenting it himself. He was also not going to use the non-aggression agreement as a mechanism. It existed outside the bounds of this situation, and importing it would be a category error. The package needed to reach her through a channel she would find only if she was looking. If she found it, she would understand that someone had placed it for her to find. She would not know who. She would verify the contents. She would draw her own conclusions about the source's motives, likely correctly, and act in the way she was already positioned to act. He began composing the package. He worked for 3 evenings in the residential tower room after the 10th hour, with his lamp and his cipher and the specific patience of work that has to be completed before it can be used. On the 3rd evening, the package was complete, 10 pages, in an organizational format consistent with a House Administrative Intelligence brief, on the heavy paper he used for clean copies of cipher materials. He examined it once, confirmed that every claim was either documentable or documented, confirmed that nothing traceable to his own observation was present, and placed it in a sealed folder with a covering summary that identified only the topic and not the author. He looked at it for a moment. Then he put it away and went to sleep, because the next thing was not tonight's problem. Tomorrow he would place it. Tonight it was finished, and finished was sufficient. He had been tracking the position indicators for 4 weeks before he placed the package. The first observation had been incidental. In the restricted section on a Tuesday morning, he had noted that the church institutional history shelf, 3rd bay from the west wall, 3 shelves from the floor, had a slight displacement in the arrangement of the second administrative register from the left, the kind of displacement produced by someone removing a volume and returning it fractionally out of alignment. He had not moved that register. He had not removed any volume from that shelf on that visit. He returned on Thursday. The same register had been touched again. The dust pattern on the shelf top was broken in the 2-inch space to the left of the spine. A second visit in the same week, same shelf, same volume. He confirmed over the following 3 weeks, she was accessing the church institutional history shelf on a semi-regular schedule, roughly twice weekly, always between the 3rd and 5th hours. The specific volume she was pulling most frequently was the foundational century history, the same text he had used in his own cross-referencing work. She had gone deeper into the same section. She had been in it longer than his 2.5 months of working there would have taken her. She had been doing this before he arrived. The dead drop needed to be invisible to anyone who was not looking for it and obvious to anyone who was. It needed to be in a place she would be. It needed to be formatted in a way that looked like it belonged there rather than like it had been placed there, and it needed to be findable by her without requiring her to know it was there. He found the format in the shelf itself, the administrative register that contained the charter, the one he had found in November, was preceded on the same shelf by a thin folder of church correspondence that was approximately the same age and the same binding style as his package. It was not identical, his paper was newer. But the organizational format was close enough, and the church institutional history section was the kind of section that accumulated administrative materials from multiple eras, which meant a folder that appeared slightly too recent was consistent with the section's existing character. He placed the package on the Thursday evening in late February, 30 minutes before the restricted section closed for the night, using his authorized access and the archivist's inattention to the movement between bays. He positioned it 2 folders to the right of the charter, in the administrative correspondence subsection, with its spine flush and its cover slightly inset, the angle of a document that had been replaced rather than placed for the first time. He signed out at the desk and went back to the residential tower and thought about the prefectural grain survey from the second section of his economic analysis assignment, which was due in 4 days and which he had been using as the evening's official occupation. He did not watch her find it. He knew she would find it because she had been in the section twice the week prior and her visit pattern was regular enough that a Thursday or Friday return was probable. He did not know which day. He could not watch without compromising the position he had spent 5 months building, and watching was also, separately, not useful. The thing he needed to know was not whether she found it, but what she did with it. What she would do with it. She would read the covering summary and immediately understand that it was a compiled intelligence brief, not a document that belonged in the administrative history section. She would read the contents and recognize that the organizational method was more systematic than anything her own sources had produced about Vellin. She would look for a source indicator in the document and find none. She would consider who had the capability and the motive to compile this, and she would either reach an incorrect conclusion or she would reach a conclusion she chose not to act on directly. She would verify it. She would not act on unverified intelligence, even if it was good. This was a characteristic he had read clearly from everything he knew of her operational method. Verification would take her approximately 1 week, possibly 2. Her own sources had partial overlap with his. The institutional connections between Vellin and the church administrative decisions were verifiable through public records and house networks if you knew what to cross-reference. After verification, she would act. He was not predicting the form of the action. That depended on variables he did not have. Dean Hestia's current positioning relative to the church's influence agenda, which other faculty had evidence Seraphine might hold. Whether Hestia would want the matter handled publicly or quietly. The prediction was only that she would act, and that the action would be effective, and that it would be faster than anything he could have done directly. 3 days after placing the package, he received a small administrative notification from the restricted section. His spring research authorization had been reviewed and confirmed for an additional 60 days. This was routine. Vellin's sponsorship required seasonal renewal. He filed it and forgot it. For days after that, he sat in Vellin's seminar on a Tuesday morning and listened to Vellin introduce a primary source analysis of the church's role in post-fragmentation educational policy. Vellin's teaching method this session was the Socratic one he used for analytically dense material. Not lecturing, but pulling questions from the group until the group's collective reasoning had assembled the framework, then building on it with the source material. It was, as always, genuinely effective. The group produced better analysis together than any of them would have produced individually. Kael answered 2 questions and asked 1. He sat at the end of the long table with the pale February light through the east windows and listened to Vellin teach and thought about the specific quality of knowing what he knew about the man in front of him and continuing to be in the room. It was not a comfortable quality. He had anticipated it wouldn't be, and he had anticipated correctly, and the anticipation made it easier than it might have been, which did not make it easy. He noted, the capacity to continue doing useful things when the surrounding conditions were not comfortable was something he had been practicing since he was 8. The practice was working. He was in the room and his notes were accurate, and his 2 questions were the right 2 questions to ask this particular morning. He went to the dining hall after and ate with the study group. Lorne had found a flaw in the assigned reading citation structure, a secondary source misidentified as primary, which propagated through the argument in a way that would have been devastating if anyone had caught it in a formal setting. Renner was delighted by this in the specific way he was delighted by structural flaws. Sova had caught the same error independently and was less delighted because she had already rewritten the relevant section of her essay to account for it, and the rewriting had cost her a morning. Kael had caught it too, but had said nothing because the misidentification was not something he wanted to explain how he'd identified without referencing the original primary source, which he had not been assigned. He ate his soup and let the conversation run, and looked at the February light on the dining hall's stone floor and thought, the package was placed. The mechanism was in motion. What happened next was not in his hands, and this was the intended outcome, and he had designed it to be the intended outcome, and it was therefore not a thing that benefited from further thought. He ate his soup. Outside the dining hall windows, the February afternoon was the specific gray of a season that had not yet decided whether it was ending or continuing. He did not see the meeting. He had not expected to see it. It was not the kind of meeting that would be visible. What happened between Seraphine Voss and Dean Hestia in the administrative building on the afternoon of the 4th day of March happened behind a closed door with no witnesses other than the participants, which was exactly how both parties would have wanted it. He saw the effects. The first effect arrived on the Tuesday morning of Vellin's seminar. He arrived at the 3rd floor of the central building at the usual time and found the seminar room door closed. Not locked, the handle turned, but inside the room was dark and contained no one. He stood in the corridor for a moment and looked at the closed door and the specific dark inside it, and then he went back downstairs and checked the administrative board. Theological History and Ethics, Spring Term Sessions, Temporary Leave of Absence, Instructor M. Vellin, effective March 6th. Course sessions will be covered by Senior Lecturer P. Morin pending administrative review. Students enrolled in the course will receive notification of schedule changes by the end of this week. He stood at the administrative board and read it. Administrative review. Not dismissed. not resigned, under review, which meant the mechanism had worked the way he had modeled it should work. Hestia had moved quickly enough to prevent Vellin destroying records or warning whoever was above him in the order's chain. But she had done it through institutional process rather than summary removal. The review was the form the process took when the evidence was sufficient for immediate action, but the institutional context required formal procedure to protect the Academy from an allegation of arbitrary action. Administrative review meant the outcome was already determined. The form was not yet complete. He went to his morning lecture. The second effect arrived on Wednesday afternoon. He passed 2 senior faculty members in the corridor outside Hestia's office at the 4th hour. They were speaking in voices calibrated to carry no further than the distance between them, which was approximately 2 feet. He caught 2 words and a tone. The words were expedited and records. The tone was the tone of people who had been told to do something quickly and were doing it quickly and had questions about the pace that they would not ask directly. Records were being collected expeditiously. The third effect arrived on Thursday morning. The church representative, Deacon Fold, whose monitoring pattern Kael had spent 3 weeks mapping before using him as a channel, departed the Academy. This was not announced. He noticed the departure because Damien's library session on Thursday afternoon had no observer at the adjacent table for the first time since Kael had been watching it. Fold's absence was clean and complete. He did not appear at dinner in the faculty dining hall, where he had occasionally eaten as an authorized guest. Voluntarily, the official language would say, if anyone asked. He had asked to be released from his current assignment. The request had been granted. Kael sat in his usual library position with his aura theory text and observed the empty table where Fold should have been and watched Damien work through a combat theory problem in his notebook, alone, without the presence at his shoulder. Damien looked up once, briefly, at the table where Fold had always sat. He looked at it for 2 seconds and then returned to his notebook. He was not the kind of person who noted absence with suspicion. He was the kind of person who noted absence as simple absence. The fourth effect arrived on Friday, in the form of Vellin's seminar room, which had been cleaned and reset for senior lecturer Morin's introductory session. Kael sat at the end of the table and took notes in Morin's lecture, which was competent and well-organized and entirely free of the quality that had made Vellin's teaching worth attending. He took the notes anyway, because the course was still on his academic record, and the academic record was still a tool, and tools were maintained even when the immediate use was not in evidence. At the end of the session, Morin asked if there were questions. There were 3, none of them his. He walked out of the room at the close of the session, into the third-floor corridor with its east-facing windows and the March light beginning to hold real warmth for the first time since December. He walked past the door of the seminar room and past the window and past the turn toward the staircase. He paused at the window. Below, in the eastern courtyard, the early March students were at the tables that appeared each spring, as if the weather itself had placed them, and were reading and talking and existing in the mid-afternoon way of people who were between obligations. Nothing about the courtyard indicated that anything had changed. 3 months from now, the events of this week would be a story that circulated in the Aura Track's higher social environment. The professor removed under administrative review. The circumstances unclear. The church influence angle quietly noted. In 5 years it would be a footnote in the Academy's internal institutional history, if anyone documented it at all. He stood at the window for approximately 30 seconds. Then he went downstairs and walked across the eastern courtyard toward the library, and the March sun was on his back with a warmth that was the first warmth in 3 months, and the students at the tables were there and alive and unaware. And the library door was heavy and cool and opened onto the particular smell that had been specific to this building since his first week. He went inside to work. He did not speak to Seraphine about it. This was not an avoidance. There was nothing specific to say. The non-aggression agreement did not require reporting to each other. The action she had taken was hers to take. It was not, from her perspective, connected to the package she had found in the restricted section, because she would have verified the package's contents through her own sources and would have presented the evidence as her own independently verified intelligence, which it was. His documentation had given her the systematic framework. Her verification had made it hers. The specific intelligence, work quality, she would have recognized in the package. That would remain a question she held in the open category. She knew someone was operating at that level inside the academy. She had a hypothesis. She would not confirm it until she chose to, and when she chose to would be on her own schedule and for her own reasons. He was comfortable with this. He attended his seminars, completed his assignments, trained at his authorized profile in the practice arenas, and ate dinner with Renner and Sova and Lorne and Cass, who had been working on a healer track anatomy practicum that she described as genuinely interesting for the first 3 days, and then there's a point where you understand that the rest of it is just the first 3 days in more detail, which was accurate about most formal education, he noted, though he did not say this aloud. The March evenings were longer than February's, and not yet warm enough to sit at the courtyard tables comfortably. He studied in his room and filed his notes and continued the work that continued regardless of what else was happening. The mechanism had moved. It had produced its outcome. What came after was the next problem. He opened his economic analysis text and worked until the 11th hour. Fold left on a Thursday and did not return on a Friday. This was the first time since October that Damien had spent a full library session without a church representative present at the adjacent table. Kael had not anticipated this. He had modeled a same-day replacement as the probable response, given the order's demonstrated capacity to maintain coverage and the obvious vulnerability of a 2-day gap in a stable operation. A same-day replacement had not arrived. A Friday replacement had not arrived. By the end of Saturday, when Damien's second regular weekly library session concluded without anyone occupying the observer's position, Kael had revised his model. The replacement had not been arranged in advance of Fold's departure, which meant Fold's departure had been faster than the order expected. Faster than they expected. Good. He filed this. What it produced: 2 days in which Damien Cross existed in the academy without an active attunement connection, maintaining his secondary core structure. He spent the 2 days watching. The first thing he noticed was the aura. He was at a position 4 tables over from Damien's usual spot in the library on Friday morning, with the Physics of Aura Structures text open at the page he had actually come to read, and his passive spatial sense of the range that allowed him to register aura signatures without actively interrogating them, the mode that his cover allowed. The low-grade ambient reading that a student with any affinity development at all would have operating without effort. Damien's aura output was different. Not dramatically. If you were not specifically watching for it, if you had not spent 5 months holding Damien's signature in the same low-grade awareness you applied to every spatial element in your immediate environment, you would not have noticed. What Kael noticed, the specific consistency of Damien's output was slightly less consistent. The secondary structure had maintained his output at a particular steady-state emission pattern. Without it, the output fluctuated in the range of 3 to 5% around the same mean. Not erratic. Organic. The difference between the rhythm of a clock that had been wound by a clockmaker and the rhythm of a clock that had been wound by its owner, the same mechanism, the same movement, a slightly different quality of the interval. He sat with this observation for 30 minutes before adding another layer. The behavioral observations were subtler, and he was not certain until he had 2 data points that he was reading signal rather than noise. At the first hour and 40 minutes of the Friday session, Renner arrived at the library to retrieve a text from the economics section and passed within 2 tables of Damien on the way. Damien looked up, as he usually did when someone passed. He was the kind of person who tracked the room out of sociable instinct rather than strategic awareness, and said something brief that Kael read as a greeting at distance. Renner said something back. Damien laughed. Not an unusual event. Damien laughed regularly. He was a person whose face and voice defaulted to warmth. What was unusual? The laugh arrived in Damien's face approximately half a second faster than his usual response time, and it ran 3 words longer than his typical exchange. And afterward, he looked after Renner's departing figure for approximately 1 second before returning to his text, which was the look of someone who had enjoyed the exchange slightly more than the scale of the exchange warranted. The secondary structure calibrated something in his social presentation. In its absence, his warmth was fractionally less managed, not less genuine, but less timed. The second data point arrived on Saturday, when Damien was in the economics section looking for a secondary source for an assignment and Kael was in the same section for legitimate reasons, and they were in proximity for approximately 4 minutes. Damien's reference inquiry to Kael, "Excuse me, the third shelf from the right is the trade history section, yes?" received an accurate answer, after which Damien said, "I appreciate it," and then, in the space that usually closed the exchange, said, "The trade history section is genuinely more interesting than I thought it would be," which is, I suppose, how all the good sections work, and looked faintly surprised at himself for having said it, in the way of someone whose conversational output had slightly exceeded its usual calibration. Kael said he found the same thing true. Damien nodded and took his book and went back to his table. The exchange was 17 words longer than it would ordinarily have been. Kael stood for a moment in the trade history section with the text he had come to retrieve, and noted this, and placed it next to the laugh data point, and considered what it meant. The replacement arrived Saturday evening. He registered the new representative's presence at the Sunday morning session. Different from Fold's profile, slightly older, the academy credentials she would have required renewed urgently over the weekend. She sat 2 tables from Damien with the same specific quality of not watching that all of them had, the studied inattention of active observation. Damien's aura restabilized within 4 hours. By the midday meal on Sunday, the fluctuation pattern had returned to the steady-state consistency he had maintained all year. He ate with the study group and watched Damien 3 tables over, and noted that the laugh when Damien's neighbor made a joke arrived at his standard timing, not at the fractionally faster timing of the 2-day window. The secondary structure had re-established its calibration and was holding it. He wrote in his cipher that evening, "Open question closed." Destabilization of secondary structure does not damage primary core. Mechanism: temporary disruption of the steady-state calibration, natural recovery within approximately 4 hours of re-establishment. Primary core autonomous function confirmed. Below that, new observation: secondary structure calibrates behavioral expression as well as aura output. Possible functions: 1. Maintains impressive output above Damien's natural current level enhancement. 2. Suppresses specific output patterns that the order finds inconvenient control. Cannot determine which from exterior observation. Both may be true simultaneously. He had been assuming enhancement. The 2-day window raised the possibility of a more complicated relationship, a structure that enhanced in some dimensions and constrained in others simultaneously, producing a specific version of Damien that was useful to whoever had built it. He held this for a while without resolving it, because it was not yet resolvable. The new representative, he would establish her name in due course, had settled into her observation position and her notebook. The notebook was the same size as Fold's. The pencil was the same church standard gray. Everything had been reestablished. He closed the cipher and looked at the ceiling of his room, which was plaster and had a small water stain in the eastern corner that had not changed since September. The order had recovered faster than he had expected. He noted this as a data point about their organizational resilience. Losing Vellin had not broken the operation. Losing Fold had not broken the observation chain. What it had produced was a brief window and a replacement. The operation was designed for exactly this kind of disruption. 12 years he had known about. 120 years the charter had existed. This was the organizational depth of a thing that had outlasted every political structure in the kingdom by 3 generations. He noted this too, and put it where he put things that didn't need to be resolved tonight, and went to sleep. By the 2nd week of March the order had gone quiet. Not silent, the new representative maintained her position with consistency. Damien's calibration continued undisturbed. The church's institutional presence in the academy continued at its ordinary level. What had gone quiet was the operational layer that Kael had been reading above those visible activities, the pattern of administrative inquiries, the frequency of the representative's outgoing notes, the small movements through Vellin-adjacent channels that had been ongoing since he arrived in September and that had now stopped. The specific quality of this quiet was not the quiet of abandonment. It was the quality of an operation that had identified an uncertainty and was waiting until the uncertainty resolved before proceeding. He knew this quality because he had produced it himself at a smaller scale, when something unexpected had changed his information picture. The period after seeing Seraphine in the library corridor and believing she hadn't seen him. The period of held plans and suspended movements, waiting until he understood the new state of things before committing to the next action. The Order was doing the same thing at an organizational level. They had lost an embedded faculty member to an administrative process they had not anticipated, and they were now assessing who had done this. Was it targeted? What had been seen? He thought about this as he walked to his morning practical on a Thursday in mid-March. With the Academy's March light and March sounds in the courtyard, the new warmth in the air. The birds that had come back into the Academy grounds, and whose presence was audible from the residential tower in a way it hadn't been in winter. He thought about the silence the way you think about weather, information about conditions, not a problem in itself. The silence told him several things. First, the Order's response time was organized and disciplined. 3 weeks from Vellin's removal to a fully operational quiet was fast for an organization that was managing this level of complexity at multiple sites across the kingdom. They were not improvising. They had protocols for exactly this situation. Second, whoever was above Vellin in the structure, the regional shepherd, or someone at the congregational assembly level, was conducting the assessment from outside the academy. The silence was organizational quiet, not of physical absence. The decision-making had moved to a higher level, which meant the local embedded element was in a holding pattern. Third, Seraphine was the visible actor in this. She had presented evidence to the dean. She was the face of the action. If the Order was assessing the source of the threat, their first-order analysis would conclude that the threat was House Voss and a well-positioned student with specific intelligence about church-adjacent operations. They would not, from that analysis, immediately identify a second actor. He was not on their revised threat model. He intended to stay that way. His own response had begun the week after Vellin's removal. He had removed 2 of his secondary intelligence channels from active operation. The first, a route he had been using for administrative record cross-reference that ran through a clerk Varen's sponsorship, gave him access to. The clerk was not an active member of his network. He was not Kael's anything, just someone whose professional function was accessible to authorized academy researchers. But the specific access pattern Kael had used in assembling the Vellin documentation was visible in the administrative log as a series of cross-references that a thorough review would identify as purposeful rather than casual. He removed himself from that access pattern by adjusting his research inquiry descriptions for the next 4 weeks to focus on legitimately different materials. The second, a social information channel that ran through Renner, who absorbed and redistributed information about the Aura track student population through his natural talkativeness and his genuine interest in people. Kael had been using Renner's outputs passively, without directing or manipulating them, but using them nonetheless. Renner talked about people, and Kael filed what Renner said into his operational picture. For 4 weeks, he stopped. He continued to eat with Renner and engage with him as a person, because Renner was a person he genuinely found engaging. He simply stopped incorporating the social detail into active use. The exercise was in removing any pattern that could now be associated with the pre-March operation if someone was looking at his behavior from outside. He added, from active operation, 2 things. First, he increased the density of legitimately explainable academic activity in his observable pattern. More time in the library at expected hours, more recorded research inquiries of the uninstructive variety, more visible engagement in seminars. Second, he doubled the rigor of his aura suppression in the practice arena, after noticing that over the past month he had allowed the calibration to settle slightly higher than necessary in a low observation environment. Not a crack in the cover subdetection, but a discipline that had softened slightly from the early term standard. He ran through the revised protocol for 10 days and assessed it as stable. The quiet was, he recognized, a teaching moment of a specific kind. He had known from the charter analysis that the Order was institutional and generational. He had understood intellectually that this meant their response to operational disruption would be measured rather than reactive. What the silence was showing him, in the experiencing of it, was the texture of what that meant in practice. Not panic, not retaliation, not even visible reassessment. just a pause, organized and quiet, within which the organization did whatever organizations of this kind did when they updated their threat picture. The pause would end. It would end when the organization had finished its assessment and decided whether the Vellin removal represented a specifically targeted threat that required response or a general political move by House Voss that had happened to damage one of their assets. If the former, they would shift their approach to the academy level and possibly to Seraphine. If the latter, they would re-embed more carefully and continue. He could not know which conclusion they would reach. He could only know that they would reach one, and that the outcome of their conclusion would be visible in the next change in the observable pattern. He was watching for it. He sat in his room in the March evening with his practical notes for the following day's lab assessment and thought about the specific patience that a well-organized adversary required. Not the patience of waiting for something to arrive, that was easy, just time. The patience of maintaining full attention on a situation in which nothing was currently happening and in which the nothing happening was itself the signal. The patience of knowing that the moment you relaxed your attention, the thing you were waiting to notice would arrive. He had been developing this patience since he was 8. He returned to his practical notes, which concerned the measurement methodology for aura output consistency in repeated stimulation trials, and which he had been approached to take notes on in the lab partner assignment because his lab partner, a second-year scholarship student named Ferris, who was genuinely talented but disorganized, produced data accurately and recorded it inconsistently. He organized Ferris's data alongside his own and produced notes that were clean and coherent and that would serve both of them adequately when the lab assessment arrived. Outside his window, the March evening was cooling quickly into the specific cold of a season that had remembered it was not yet spring. The birds had stopped and the courtyard was quiet, and the sky had the deep blue that appears just after March sunsets before it darkens to actual night. He worked until the oil in his lamp was half gone, then put the notes away and prepared for sleep. The quiet continued. He was ready for when it didn't. The end of the first academy year arrived the way ends tend to, incrementally, and then all at once. There was a specific week in early June when the remaining sessions seemed to be simultaneously winding down and carrying their full weight final practicals, synthesis essays, the academic review panels for scholarship renewal, the tournament retrospective that the senior faculty presented to the full student body in the main hall on a Friday afternoon as a matter of tradition. He attended everything he was required to attend, and some things he attended from the corner of a room with the specific attention of someone for whom the week had more information density than it appeared to. The synthesis essay was the most useful of them. He had written it on administrative governance structures in post-fragmentation frontier regions, which was the subject he could write most credibly and at the highest actual density, and which bore a sufficient surface resemblance to legitimate first-year academic work that the faculty would read it as what it presented itself as. He had included 4 claims that were non-obvious and that he could source to legitimate restricted section materials, because non-obvious sourced claims in a first-year synthesis essay produced a specific kind of academic notation. Exceptional independent research that added to the profile without drawing personal attention. He had included them without flourish. He received the notation. He filed it in the appropriate column. He assembled his assessment before the academic year ended, on a Thursday evening in the second week of June, with the Academy's specific early summer sounds in the courtyard below his window, later evenings, people staying at the outdoor tables until past the 8th hour, the quality of warmth that had arrived in May and was now simply present. He divided the assessment into 2 parts, because 2 parts was the accurate structure. Official standing, first-year general track student, academic performance, upper quarter, physical assessment, 42nd percentile combined, slightly above the 40th he had targeted, a drift he corrected in the final month. No disciplinary notations. 1 tournament run that had produced a specific social story, the QF win against a silver or a third year, the semi-final loss to Seraphine boss. The general consensus of the student body that he was exceptional for general track and unexplained for any track. He was not in the Aura track's social conversation as a threat. He was in it as an anomaly filed under interesting but not tracked. Actual operational standing, He knew the Academy's political landscape more precisely than anyone in it, with the probable exception of Seraphine and the certain exception of Dean Hestia. He had a non-aggression agreement with the most politically significant student at the Academy. He had identified, neutralized, and replaced one Order-embedded faculty member without any of these actions being traceable to him as their source. He had confirmed the full Vellin fold chain and the mechanism by which student intelligence traveled from the Academy to the Order. He had confirmed the secondary core structure's resilience and acquired the specific knowledge that short-term disruption of Damien Cross's anchor was non-fatal to his primary core. He had mapped the Order's organizational behavior under threat, the speed of their response, the discipline of their quiet, and filed it as data about their structural design. He was not on anyone's threat list. The second item in the official standing column was the one that had cost the most. The things the year had cost were not the kind of thing he listed in a cipher. They were not operational data. They were the sum of 9 months of maintained calibration in a shared residential environment where every spontaneous response required interception before arrival and every genuine reaction had to be processed through the question of whether this particular genuine reaction was available to him here. The study group had cost him something he did not have a clean name for. He found Renner and Sova and Lorne and Cass interesting in the way he had noted in the cipher back in October. Genuinely, not strategically, both things being simultaneously true. The cost of that was that genuine interest without strategic purpose had to be managed differently than strategic interest. Because genuine interest could not be deprioritized when the situation required it without producing a response in him that he had to manage separately. He managed it. But the management was not free. He had spent 9 months with Seraphine Voss in his peripheral awareness constantly, which was a different cost from any other. Not unmanageable, not even uncomfortable, in the ordinary sense of the word. A specific quality of attention that he had maintained since September at the level that the situation required, which was a high level, and which had not varied. In the last 4 months of the year, since December, that attention had more information content than it had before December. He noticed this without examining it. What he had not spent the year doing, using the combination technique, accessing the full range of his spatial sense, training at his actual capability level except in the pre-dawn sessions in the general use arena before anyone else arrived. The specific cost of that, the cost of operating at 40% when you knew the other 60% existed and was there and functional, was not a cost he had anticipated with full accuracy before arriving. He was more accurate about it now. The departure scenes were the kind he had been observing all year from the outside. Students with travel bags, family carriages at the main gate, the specific quality of leave-takings that had been planned and were now being executed. He packed in 2 hours on a Friday morning. He did not require much space. He had arrived with what he needed and had not accumulated beyond it. The academic materials went into the document case he had brought from the barony. The personal materials were few enough that the larger bag was not full. Renner found him in the corridor carrying the document case and said, with the directness of someone who had not thought about whether to say it, "Same table next year?" "Same table next year," he said. Renner's handshake went on half a second longer than its ordinary duration, which was Renner's version of an unmanaged response. Sova, at the bottom of the staircase with her own well-organized bags, gave him a brief professional nod and then said, "Your tournament run." She paused. "Your record doesn't match what I saw in the stands." She paused again. "Next year it won't need to." He looked at her. "That's not a question," she said. "I'm just noting the discrepancy for my own reference." He said, "Noted." She left before he could say anything else, which was accurate Sova behavior. Lorne was in the courtyard, waiting for a coach connection to the eastern roads. He said, "Next term," and offered his hand, and the handshake was the kind Gareth had taught him, direct, uncomplex, complete. Cass had left her dried ginger on his study table the previous evening, the 3rd time this year, in the same position. He had found it when he came back from the library after the 10th hour, and had placed it in his document case, where it would not be crushed. He walked out the main gate of the academy into the June morning with his bag and his document case, and the specific physical sensation of a body that had been breathing compressed for 9 months and had just walked through a door into a space where full breath was available again. He stood at the gate for a moment. The summer capital road lay ahead of him. The sun was already warm. The June morning had the quality of full summer with the morning's freshness still in it. He thought it was a good year's work. Then he put the bag more comfortably on his shoulder and began the walk to the coach station. The road home took 7 days. Summer roads were faster than winter ones. The surface held and the coaches ran longer hours in the late light. He had a day in the capital before the first coach connection and used it to check 2 drop points and to walk the noble district in the specific mode of someone who had been reading intelligence about a place for a year and was now reading the place itself. The intelligence was accurate where it mattered and incomplete in the texture, which was the expected relationship between correspondence and direct observation. The noble district tea houses that Var Aldrin had identified as noble council staffer gathering points were exactly where the notes said they would be. The specific quality of who was in them in the morning versus the afternoon was something no correspondence had communicated. He spent 40 minutes in the vicinity of one and mapped the current year pattern against the prior year notes and found 3 differences. He filed the differences. At the Court Street drop, Torin had left 2 items. He retrieved them in the paper shop cover and sat with a cup of the shop's terrible tea and read them. The first, a summary of the spring capital season's notable events, in the commercial cipher that served as the surface layer. Below the surface, in the second layer, the content was more specific. The king had appeared at the Midsummer Court event in April at reduced capacity. The public ceremony had been shortened by 40 minutes without announcement. The formal dining that typically followed had been cancelled. A court physician had attended the reception rather than a chamberlain. The Succession Council, the informal advisory body that had been meeting since the previous autumn's missed sessions, was now meeting twice monthly rather than weekly, which Torin flagged as ambiguous. Either the crisis had stabilized, which would reduce meeting frequency, or the council had finished its preliminary work and moved to a different organizational phase, which would also reduce meeting frequency. The second, a note from Carrion. Quarterly report on schedule. Content. The Crestfall legal challenge had formally concluded its first review process. The outcome was a procedural continuation, not a resolution. Kael's timeline estimate of 12 to 18 months for the formal challenge's next phase was consistent with the administrative notation. The mineral registry petition for the iron deposit survey was listed in the registry's spring processing queue at position 43 of 61. Progress. He finished the terrible tea and retrieved his bag and walked to the coach station. He arrived at Ashford Barony on the afternoon of the 7th day, at the hour when the summer light was long and gold, and the specific quality of frontier summer air, drier than the capital's, cooler at the edges despite the heat, was present everywhere. Aldrich was at the gate. He had not been asked to be at the gate. There was no reason to expect him to know exactly which day Kael would arrive, given that the coach connection's timing was variable and Kael had sent his expected arrival date as a range. He was at the gate because he was the kind of person who arrived at gates slightly early and waited there without minding the waiting. Kael put the bag down at the gate. Aldrich looked at him for a moment with the look he had seen since he was 8 years old, the look that was not trying to find anything in particular, just looking at him as he was, whatever that currently was. "You look the same," Aldrich said. "Yes." Aldrich picked up the bag, which Kael had intended to carry himself, and they walked into the barony. That evening at dinner, the conversation was specific and ordinary. The spring harvest estimates, better than last year, still below the 5-year average that the improved drainage would eventually address. The Southeast Drainage Project's final completion notation from the builders, a trade dispute with the Greneth holding over grazing boundaries in the Second Valley that Aldrich had resolved in April through written arbitration. He told Kael about the resolution method, and Kael noted where the resolution was solid and where it had left a procedural ambiguity that would recur in 3 to 5 years if the boundary wasn't formally resurveyed. "I noted that too," Aldrich said. "I spoke to Solicitor Bast about commissioning a survey." "When?" "May. She's scheduled it for autumn." He refilled Kael's cup. She said it was overdue. Kael said she was correct. After dinner, when the evening had settled into the kitchen's specific summer quiet, the day's work complete, the next day not yet begun, Aldrich said, "You look tired." Kael had known this was coming since they sat down for dinner. Aldrich had been looking at him with the specific look of someone who was noticing something and deciding when to name it. "The year was demanding," he said. "How so?" He considered how to answer this. "The cover requires constant maintenance in a shared residential environment," he said. "It's sustainable. It's also continuous." Aldrich looked at him across the kitchen table with the expression that was not quite a question, more the expression of someone who understood something without requiring it to be explained further, and was simply present with the understanding. "You'll rest here," Aldrich said. "Yes." "Good." He stood and took the cups to the wash basin. "Gareth wants to start working with you in the morning. I told him to let you sleep first." Kael said, "Tell him the 6th hour." Aldrich said, "I'll tell him the 7th. Kael did not argue with this. The 7th hour was, in fact, a reasonable starting time. Gareth was at the field at the 6th hour. He was doing maintenance work on the southern fence line when Kael arrived, with the particular quality of someone who had been there since the 5th hour and was not going to acknowledge this. He straightened when Kael came through the field gate and looked at him the way he had been looking at Kael for 6 years, directly and without assessment, because the assessment was already complete and updated continuously and did not require examination. "Warm up," he said. Kael began. He ran the southern perimeter at the pace he had run for 9 months in the Academy's practice arena, the pace calibrated to a body with a fractured core, which was approximately 40% of his actual capability. He ran the first quarter perimeter at this pace. Gareth said, "Stop that." He stopped. Gareth said, "Run at the speed you actually are." He stood for a moment at the edge of the south field with the June morning around him and the frontier air at its specific quality and the birds in the southern copse doing the summer thing they did after dawn. He ran. 9 months of compressed output released into the barony's open air with the specific sensation of a body that had been told repeatedly to be smaller than it was and was now being told not to be. The perimeter unfurled at full pace, Gareth's training over 6 years, not the constrained academy version, not the calibrated for observation version, and the spatial sense went out to its full frontier range, reading the field and the copse and the road to the east and the drainage channel at the valley's edge and the entire geography of the space at once, which was not a threat assessment, just what the spatial sense did when it was allowed to be itself. He reached the north corner of the perimeter and turned and kept running, and the morning air was cool at the edges and warm in the sun, and the frontier smelled of summer grass and the specific dry quality that the capital and the academy did not have, which he had not known he had been missing until now. He finished the perimeter and came back to Gareth. Gareth looked at him for 2 seconds. He said, "You held that for 9 months." "Yes." "Without a break." "The pre-dawn sessions." Gareth made a sound that was not quite acknowledgement and not quite something else and turned back to the fence work. "We'll run the full protocol this summer," he said. "Starting tomorrow." A pause. 6 hours. Kael said, 6 hours. He walked back to the house through the morning light and thought about the summer laid out ahead of him, 7 weeks, the barony around him, no cover required. The iron deposit registration certificate was on Aldrich's desk in the study, confirmed and filed, the formal registration that made the deposit part of the administrative record of the kingdom's mineral registry, significantly harder to seize through informal means than it had been before. For Aldrin's spring correspondence, which he had collected from the Thornfield drop on his way through 2 days prior, sat in his document case with Torrens items. He would read it tomorrow after Gareth's session. The King's condition, the succession council, the council vote positioning, all of it waiting in the document case with the specific patience of information that had been accurate when written and that required reading to determine whether it was still accurate now. Tonight, dinner and sleep and the south field in the late evening with the spatial sense out to its full range and nothing it needed to be protecting against. Just the barony's terrain arranged around him in the dark with the specific quality of a thing that was his to understand. He went inside. He slept, that night, without any of the particular alertness of 9 months in a shared residential environment where things could arrive through a door. The sleep had the quality he had been describing to himself, without naming it directly, since he was old enough to understand what he had lost in his first life and had not expected to find again in this one. He slept well. In the morning, Gareth would be at the field at the 6th hour and Kael would be there at the 6th hour, and the summer would begin.